Okay, so we have a fairly simple store with a little bit of CRUD functionality in it. One of the problems I see with the store is like the admin nature of the store is a little bit tangled up with the customer facing aspect of the store, right? So you have, if this was an actual website, you probably wouldn't want all your customers to be able to edit or delete your products. We're not going to handle that today. We're just going to, I'll remove the edit and delete links from my partial just to make it look a bit more like a forward-facing store. One of the things you might want to consider doing on your project is, instead of relying on scaffolded CRUD for something like editing your products, there are some admin dashboards that you can add to Rails as gems that will do that for you. There's a whole ecosystem of gems out there, and it's sometimes hard to know which ones to use. And so there's a website called the Ruby Toolbox that not only for Rails, but for Ruby in general, lists all sorts of categories of gems that exist, and also sort of gives you some indication on sort of which are the most commonly used, or which are I won't say better, but sort of more used by the community at large. And there is, I'm going to go to admin. So there's a section for Rails plugins, and specifically there's a section for Rails admin interfaces. And if you look in there, the one that I have experience with is something called Active Admin. You can see up here the different gems that are in this category are listed, each with a number beside them, and this number is sort of automatically calculated based on things like how many downloads this gem has from the Ruby Gems website, how long ago the current version was released, how active it is in GitHub. So they're looking at sort of metrics to determine sort of which gems the community is using at large, right? So if a gem is being downloaded a lot and it's under heavy development by a large number of committers on GitHub, it's probably a safe bet that you could use that gem and feel confident that it's going to stick around for a while. Sometimes with open source projects, gems get abandoned. The person who was writing the gem decides that they're no longer interested in it, and those kind of gems, abandoned gems, tend to be ones that you don't want to include in your project because the development of them has stopped. We're not going to use Active Admin today. I just wanted to point it out because it's an easy way of adding that back-end admin stuff to your website without actually having to code it yourself. Another type of gem that a lot of people may want to use on the actual project that they're building is like a file upload gem. And so there is a category for Rails file uploads. The two top contenders here are Paperclip and Carrier Wave. I'm going to make a recommendation that if you do want to use a file upload gem in your project, that you use Carrier Wave. I have used both Paperclip and Carrier Wave. Last term I recommended Paperclip because it's the one I had most experience with, and a lot of students had a lot of troubles setting it up. And so because of that, on the most recent project that I developed, I used Carrier Wave, and I found it to be a very, very smooth process. So what it does for you is it gives you the ability to associate images or file attachments in general to particular rows in database tables. What I'm going to show you today is a bit more straightforward way, but also a bit more manual way of adding images for our products. So if I was building up a sort of a full flight sort of enterprise level e-commerce store, yes, I would go in and I would grab a Rails file upload gem and add that to my site. But today what I really just want to show you is how we work with the various different assets in Rails, how we work with images, how we work with CSS, and how we work with JavaScript. So all I'm going to do to add my images to my website is I'm going to add a new column to my products table and it's going to be a image file name column. And then I'm just going to manually put images into the app assets images folder, and that's it. So I'll be able to edit my individual products. I'll be able to specify the file name of the image that's associated with that product, and then that actual file, I'll just manually put it in this app assets images folder. Not something you would typically do on sort of a professional website, because the manual aspect of having to put the files into a particular folder, if that folder's up on a server, that means like FTPing them in. Whereas if you were using the carrier wave gem, when you went and edited the product, there would just be like a file upload button, and you could just have it all done for you. Okay, but let's do it the simpler yet non-efficient way. So how do I add a new column to my database table? I've gone and scaffolded products, and at the time I described a product to the Rails scaffolding system as having a name, a description, and a price, and that's it. And Rails went and built a migration for me. And if we look at that migration file, I'll close down some of the other stuff we were working with last time. If I go and look at that migration file, it describes a products table with a name, a description, and a price. To add a column, what you don't want to do is you don't want to go in and like manually edit this existing migration file and say, oh, I want another string column called image file name, because this migration is already run. So it's not going to be run again. Even if you used Rails' migration capabilities to sort of step back to before this was run and then edit it, that's not the whole point of migrations. The point of migrations is to capture changes to your database over time. So don't go and ever manually edit existing migration files. Yeah?
So it's almost like migrations is like a picture, by changing the picture, not changing what you took a picture of?
Yeah. So it's like the migrations are snapshots of the changes you've made to your database over time. And you do get the ability, you can use them, you can step backwards and forwards through your migrations to go backwards and forwards in time as far as your database goes. To add a new column to our database table, we can create a new migration to do that. And so I'm going to say Rails G for generate migration. And if I name my migration in a very specific way, it's going to build for me a migration that will do what I want it to do. So I'm going to say add underscore image underscore file name to products. And it's very important how we name that. It's add whatever the column name is to whatever the database table name is. So add image file name to products, and then I have to re-specify the name of the column, image file name, and specify what type it is. We could also just say Rails generate migration and give it a name and not worry about the naming conventions of that name, and then we could go into the migration file and manually write the migration. To manually write the migration, we would have to go over to the migrations guide on the Rails guide site and figure out how to manually write it. But you can always do that. You can start with a blank migration and write it yourself. But there's just a shortcut, and the shortcut is if you name your migration add X to Y, where X is the column and Y is the table name, and then you say X : data type, it'll build the correct migration for you. So I'll run that. It will then create a new file in the dbmigrate folder. So I'll go look in that dbmigrate folder and watch a new file appear. And this new file will be of the same format. It's going to start with a long timestamp, and then it'll say add image file name to products.rb. There it is, large timestamp, add image file names to products. In early versions of Rails, there was no timestamps, it was just numeric values, 1, 2, 3, 4. They added timestamps because there's a chance you could sort of step on another developer's toes. You might both get to a point where you both want to add the same migration to your system, and you might both end up creating the same file in slightly different ways. So the timestamp prevents that, because it's very unlikely that you would both create a migration at the exact same time. Okay, if we look at that in a editor, it has a name, it inherits from active record migration, and inside of a change method, it has this statement here. So if we hadn't gone about naming this in that very specific way, we would have just got a migration file that had a change in it with nothing, and we would have just had to have written this. It just so happens that adding columns to tables is so common that we have this sort of shortcut for creating these for us. Add column to the products table, the column's name, the column's data type. To actually run this, so just generating it doesn't actually change my database. I have to actually run it. I have to run it by doing a rake db migrate, which looks to that migration folder and runs any migrations that are outstanding. So running rake db migrate will add the image file name to my products table. Okay. At the beginning of this lecture, I did something that's not going to be so helpful to us. I went to my product and I removed my edit link. Well, I probably still want to be able to edit products because I want to add images to them. So I'll just quickly add that back. Link to edit product path. I think that's the correct name of the path. I'm just going to quickly check my routes. The edit product path is the name. Yeah, good. Oh, I might as well, just for the sake of helpfulness, map the root route so that this welcome aboard message is not there either. So I'll quickly hop over to my config routes file and I'll just make it so that the root maps to the products index action, because I'm likely to come back here again. It'd be nice if it was just that. Okay, so there's all of our products. I should be able to edit each one of them. My migration has run, right? If I go here, the add column migration has added an image file name to my products. I can even see that if I go into my Rails console. So if I go into my Rails console, which is my interactive Ruby prompt, I should be able to now do like a product.new and see that a product object has an image file name property. However, notice the form didn't change. So Rails isn't smart enough to go in and change that form partial, which is here. We have to do that manually, which means we have to understand this form partial a little bit more. I will show you that from the console though, if I now do a capital P product.new, products do have a image file name property. And each one of our products in the system has that, but it's currently set to nil because when they were first created, like when I created this goat cheese, there was no property of image file name. So they just have nils for those values. What I'd like is to be able to set those values from the form, both for the creation of new products and when editing existing products. Well, the nice thing is that we have the form in a partial, right? It's that underscore form.html.erb, and that partial is being rendered by both the new and the edit view. So anything I do in this one form is going to be automatically present in both the new and the edit. But now we have to look at how Rails deals with forms. And let's look at it. I'm going to collapse this for a moment just to get some of the complexity away there. This line here, remember that when we started building, and I'll get rid of this, this was for examples as well. When we were building links, we didn't manually build links in Rails. We used the link to helper. When we build forms in Rails, if they're for a particular active record object, we're not going to build the form tag itself either. Look what we're doing here. We're doing a form for, and then what we saw in the last lecture is whether we're coming here by way of new or whether we're coming here by way of edit, in both cases we have an @product variable. If we're coming here by way of new, that @product variable is just an empty product. It's just as if we've done a product.new and it's completely blank. If we're coming by way of edit, it's actually got the contents of a particular product, the one we want to edit. So we're telling Rails we want a form for a particular product. Up at the top here is where Rails checks to see if there's any errors, meaning validation errors. And if they are, it's going to display those validation errors. That's just built in. That comes with our form. That code's pre-written for us, so I'm just going to collapse it. And then here, what we have is this form for, it's a block. It's a do block, right? So form for product, do, we have a single block parameter called f, and it goes all the way to this end. So at this end, we're going to get dynamically inserted into our document a close of the form tag. And at the beginning here, we're going to get a form tag. And notice this f here is a little helper, a form builder helper, that we can use to do things like this. Build pieces of our form. So instead of manually creating a label, I say f.label, and it's a label for the name property. f.text field for the name property. f.label for the description. f.text area for the description to make it a text area rather than an input. Same thing goes for price. f.submit for a submit button. So I'm building up pieces of my form with this f dot. And what that does for me is because this whole block was created in relation to a particular product, that's why when we edit a particular form, that form data gets injected into our HTML. So when we edit a particular form, bubblegum, and the description of bubblegum is in there, even though if we look at the view, there's nothing in here that's manually echoing out the name of the product or the description of the product or the price of the product. It's because this f variable comes to us by way of this form for. This form for knows about the product in question, so if that product happens to have data inside of it, it'll automatically be placed inside of these form elements. And now we need a new one. We need one for our image file name. So I'll just replicate what we have on these 4 lines here. And instead of a label for the price, it's now a label for the image file name. And instead of a text field for the price, it's now a text field for the image file name. I'm using that f property. And if I go back to my edit, we've got an image file name. Also, if I go to my new, we've got an image file name in there as well. We're not yet done though. So bubblegum, let's say I had a picture of bubblegum. Oops, I clicked enter by accident there. So let's go and edit bubblegum again. And we had an image called bubblegum.ping. And I do a product update, and I edit it again. It's not there. But the other stuff works, right? I can change this from 50 cents to $5. But setting an image file name doesn't work. That's $5. That worked. Image file name didn't. And so the question is why? And the answer is we got to go to where this data is actually submitted to and figure that out. So if I list the routes that are available in my system by calling up a route that doesn't exist, we can see that there's a route which is a post route, so it responds to HTTP post to /products, and it goes to the products create action. If we look at the form, the new form specifically, we'll see that that's where this new form posts to. It does in fact post to /products. If I look at the edit form, we'll see that it sends its data to /product/ some numeric ID. But in either case, we're going to be routed off to either the create or the update action. So we need to go and look at what's happening in that create or update action to see why this thing isn't actually being saved. Because the other thing we'll notice is that it won't be saved from a new either. So here's a new product. I could say, oh, I'm selling Wally Gluttons. Wally Glutton doll. This is a plastic doll of Wally. $34, and I'll set, Wally Glutton.gif because it's an animated GIF. But if I edit it, that didn't stick either. So both forms are broken. Both the edit and the new is broken. If we go over to the controller, that data is either going to this create when we are posting from the new, or it's going to the update. And what they seem to be doing in both cases is, in this case, we're creating a new product using the parameters, the product parameters that came to us by way of the form. In the update, we're updating a specific product using the product parameters that came to us by way of the form. We've seen that the params hash is this thing where data goes, but what's this product params thing? It's actually a method down here with a nice handy comment on it that says, never trust parameters from the scary internet. Only allow whitelists through. And so here we're actually going to that params hash and we're saying we require information about a product, but we only want to permit from the outside world a user to submit a name, a description, or a price. Well, I have to open my whitelist up a little bit further. And I have to say, well, I need to also whitelist my image file name. This is something that was added, I think, at the beginning of Rails 4. And it was added to address a particular type of web attack called a mass assignment attack. And that kind of attack was where you could cleverly craft your own forms that would submit to Rails applications, and you could overwrite data in the database that you weren't actually allowed to overwrite. It was a problem in Rails that the Rails core team knew about for a long, long time, but it took someone hacking GitHub for them to actually recognize this. So GitHub is a giant Rails application, and you can go and submit issues on GitHub about things that you think are wrong with particular open source projects. So, this mass assignment vulnerability was known in the Rails community for a long time, and then someone submitted another issue to the Rails project on GitHub saying, you guys should really address the mass assignment vulnerability that's present in Rails. And the response from the Rails core team was, any Rails programmer worth their salt will have addressed this on their own. We don't need to address this in the framework itself. And that same user who submitted the issue said, are you sure? And then he posted a comment from the future. And the team was like, well, what's going on here? And then he posted a comment as DHH, the head of the Rails project. And what he was using was, there was a mass assignment vulnerability in the GitHub source code. And it was because of this problem in Rails. And so he basically showed to them that he could take over anyone's identity on all of GitHub because of this error in the Rails framework, because they didn't have this ability to whitelist. And so the Rails core team quickly fixed that issue.
Good. It's like Linux, it's supposed to have
Yes, like so many things are hosted on GitHub, and so you can't have it so that you could just take over identities that easily. So it was a known issue, but it took a sort of a white hat attack for them to take notice. So that's why we have to whitelist our parameters. So now that I've done that, I can go in and I can go to my Wally Glutton doll and I can say, okay, now we have like wallyglutton.gif, update product, and if I edit it again, it's stuck, right? That data's in there. Same thing goes for bubblegum. So let's get a few images. I can go to like a image search and I can search for bubblegum. There's some bubblegum. What the heck? Okay. Save image. And I'll just call this, I'll just save it to my desktop for now, bubblegum. Okay, that's good. We had some goat cheese. Mmm, yummy. Okay, save as. Goat cheese. There was a shoe phone. Shoe phone. Here's a good looking shoe phone. Show phone. Shoe phone. Okay. Wally Glutton doll. Oh, there he is. Wally Glutton.
Is there a story behind that?
Wally Glutton?
Yeah.
Just my alter ego. That's the whole story. There actually is, but I won't go into it right now. So let's put those in a known location, and the known location is going to be the assets folder of Rails. And so Rails has this assets folder inside of the app folder, and within it there's a subfolder called images, and I'm going to put all of those images in there. And so this is the manual part of dealing with images in this way. It's not necessarily the best solution. So I'm going to cut and paste all of those over to here. Shoe phone, I put an I at the end of it. Okay. They're all JPEGs, so I can go and edit these now to be correct. So that is now that. Bubblegum should be bubblegum but .jpeg. Goat cheese will be goat cheese.jpg. And the shoe phone. .jpg. And so what we'd like is we'd like them to display along with the images, not only on the index page, but also on the show page. But thankfully we made a partial for that, so we only have to edit it in one location and it'll sort of do it for both. So we'll go to my app views folder and go to my product. And maybe initially I'll make it so that one of the products does not have an image. So we'll remove Wally for a moment. And so here's what a product looks like. Let's say above the description, but below the name, we want to display the image if it's present, if there actually is one. So I'll say something like, if product.image file name is present, meaning that the column is either not a blank string or not nil or not false, display it, otherwise don't, right? So just like a little guard. And then again, it might be tempting to try to start building an image SCR, but just like we use link to build links for us and form for to build forms for us. We have a helper called image tag, which builds image tags for us. And specifically, we want this to display the image file name. And it'll path properly for us to that assets folder. And so I should now be able to go back to my index page. There's a really giant picture of cheese there. Bubblegum, shoe phone, and Wally Glutton, who had no associated image, is fine. There's no error. There's no image tag that is missing correct contents in it. Because of this little guard here, I'm only bothering to insert images if there's one actually present. I'll do a quick little check on my git status. Git add, git commit -m, added image file names to products with mods to product partial. And notice my images were also captured there. That's maybe not the best thing, right? So if you're building a dynamic web page, you might not want your images for one particular install of this web page to be part of your source code repository. You can go and edit there's a git ignore file in your root, and you could maybe say, well, ignore anything in the app assets images folder because maybe you don't want those to be part of this project as a whole, but I'll leave them in there. These images are way too big. This is another thing that using a plugin like Carrier Wave or Paperclip would help you with, because when you set up image uploads with Carrier Wave, you can also specify resizing. So you could say, I want Carrier Wave, I want you to add images to my products, but I want them on upload to be resized to these set dimensions. And it would automatically resize them for you. Yeah.
So does that compress it like in file size, or is that just
both? Yeah, it would compress it in file size and in actual size, and you could get it to do a whole bunch for you. So you could say, I want not only little tiny thumbnails, but I want sort of medium-sized images. You could say, resize it into these 4 different formats, and it would upload the file. It would keep it in its original form, and it would resize it into however many you'd specified. This is what I did for the Winnipeg election site. So for people have images associated with them, but when you upload an image, it gets converted into this little tiny version. It also gets stored as a full-size version, and when they're displayed on the web page itself, they're sort of like a medium-size version. And so, if you look at how many, we're in like up to 300 different people in this database. You don't want to be manually resizing these photos yourself into various formats. You want Rails to handle that for you. So Carrier Wave handled that resizing for us on this system. So when I went to add a new or existing, like if I edit this person here, it's just a matter of I can either remove that image or I can choose a new one. And if I choose a new one, it doesn't matter. I just pick a large one and it'll do all that resizing for me automatically. Here, that's not the case. With my store, I would have to actually go and manually resize these. But this, a poor way of handling it would be to use, like, say, for example, CSS to do the resizing for you. And I say this is a poor way because you're still sending out the whole big image, right? So if someone's on a mobile phone, on a slow 3G connection or something like that, they still have to download the whole image and then CSS resizes it. But at least it gives me the opportunity to show you where we can edit CSS in Rails. So let's just do that quickly. Let's say so I already have a class of product here. So it's like images that have a class of product. I want to set them to a particular size. We put those images in the app assets folder. There's also places for your JavaScript and your style sheets to go in those folders as well. Well, let's look at the style sheet one. There is a scaffolds.css.scss file that was automatically generated for us when we did our scaffolding, and it gives us some of the styling. For example, some of the styling that has to do with displaying error messages. So when I do this validation error and this comes up and these things get highlighted, that is because of the styling that's present in this scaffolding. This application.css is empty, effectively empty. But you can put CSS in here, plain old CSS. It doesn't have to be that special SCSS that Rails supports. And it also has this weird thing, which is like, these look like comments, but they're actually not. They're directives to Rails to pull in. This is a directive to say require this whole tree and to require self, meaning to look throughout the CSS folder and at production time bring all these CSS files into one master file and serve them out to the end user. And when we created a product, we got this product.css.scss. It's empty as well. I can add some scaffolding to it, or sorry, I can add some CSS to it. So I want to work with image tags that are inside of divs of class product. But maybe I'll also just work with the div of class product just to begin with. So I might say, you know, things that are of type class product, let's put a border on them of 1 pixel, solid gray, and put some margin around them a little bit, 10 pixel. So if I go back to my homepage, I've got like gray boxes now. Maybe I need a little bit of padding inside of them as well. Let's do that. Okay, that's nice. It's not the most beautiful website ever, but I mean, it shows that you can add styling by putting it into these files. This is a products.css.scss file, which means it supports Sass. And Sass lets us do things like nesting our rules. So if I wanted to target the product class images, I don't need to do a rule like that, which is separate. What I can do is I can nest image inside of product here, and it will only target image tags that are inside of classes of type product. So it adds hierarchy to CSS, which was highly lacking. And so this ability to nest is a really nice feature of Sass. And here's where I might limit the width of all of my images to say 200 pixels. We'll see what that looks like. There we are. So the images are more reasonable now. And there's my beautiful store. And again, this is something you wouldn't want to do in practice, right? Because you really still are serving out very large images, right? So especially if someone is coming by way of a mobile phone, you don't want to force them to download a large image just to have it rescaled by the browser to a set size. So this was just a demo by me to show you how to apply CSS. Realistically, if you were using a plugin like Paperclip or CarrierWave, you would have done the proper scaling, and the file size would actually be different. Same thing goes for JavaScripts. So in the assets folder, there's a JavaScripts folder. There's an application.js file where you can put in plain old JavaScript. jQuery comes baked into Rails, so you can use jQuery. But notice, just like the style sheets were css.scss, there are some files in here that are .js.coffee. And that's because Rails off the hop supports CoffeeScript, which is a dialect of JavaScript that makes JavaScript look a bit more like Ruby. And so if you're so inclined, you can write CoffeeScript in those files, and Rails will compile it into JavaScript before it sends it to the end user. So you write in CoffeeScript, but the end user simply gets sent JavaScript, because browsers don't support CoffeeScript natively. So there's a compilation step there. And so that's the assets folder. The assets folder is for images, style sheets, and JavaScript. And that's all I have for you for today.